The world around us is hostile to the Word of God and to biblical values, but we are called to be salt and light, to stand for truth in a decaying culture. We are not called to run from the fire, but be willing to step into the fire. God has placed you at this time in history on purpose and for a purpose. Join us as we get better equipped to address civics and culture from a biblical worldview. Welcome to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church. Let's welcome our hosts Allison Furno and Debbie Vandenboom.
Today's topic is the dark side of social media for youth. We are joined by special guest Dr. Krista Fabrick, social media marketing professor at Mesa Community College, marketing consultant, and business coach. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I just want to jump right on into it. And would you tell us a little bit about your background? You have a lot of experience on this topic.
Yeah, I do. I actually started working in social media for companies back in 2006. So I've literally worked in social media in some capacity since it became a thing, really. And then I've been teaching social media at the college level for 8 years. And I'm also the mom of 10 and 12-year-old children who are not on social media, but we'll get to that one. Definitely have experience in having those conversations too.
Yeah, so you were definitely there at the beginning. I didn't even realize it was around in 2006. I think I joined probably in 2008, around that time. So
yeah,
you've
it was
seen
Twitter in 2006.
Wow.
That's what companies were using.
And it's changed a lot over those years. There's been a lot of
has.
changes. And I don't think that kids were on social media way back then.
No.
That's been more of a new phenomenon, right?
Definitely.
It was mostly adults and college friends and things like that on social media, if I'm remembering correctly from when that started. So with that change in the fact that so many more kids are on social media now, there are so many more platforms available that kids are on, and they all have it. What are some of the specific dangers of social media that you see for children? Oh,
well, we can rattle off quickly: cyberbullying, anxiety, depression, online predators, sex trafficking. I mean, you name it. I'm going right to the dirty stuff there. Like, it is bad. And of course, screen time addiction and sleep loss, just everything. So, but statistics-wise, you said everybody's on it. They really are. 68% of preteens, that means not even teenager yet, 11, 12, 10-year-olds are on some form of social media.
Yeah.
And they're not even supposed to legally be on it, right? They're supposed to be 13. So that's awful. And then, of course, like 98% of those 13 and up are on some form of social media.
Wow. And I think, this seems to be tied to the fact that so many of them have phones, back when my kids are older. So my youngest just turned 18 and my oldest is 27. So back then, I had given my oldest daughter a flip phone because I was dropping her off at practices and I wanted to make sure that she could contact me if there was an emergency or something. But it had no internet access. It was just a flip phone. And now you have a computer in your hand by early ages. I see little toddlers in restaurants with a tablet in front of them.
Yeah.
So they're getting on social media and on the internet and on those devices younger and younger.
Yes.
And I think that probably has a lot to do with it. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah. So majority of kids do have their first smartphone, not because there are still a lot of dumb phone options. Their first smartphone
dumb phones, I like that.
By 11. That is the average age in the United States that a kid gets their first smartphone.
Yeah.
And that is changing slowly, very, very slowly, but it is changing due to movements that are happening, like Wait Until 8th, which is a resource I do recommend to parents to check out, and due to a lot of press that is happening on news, Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. And so it is slowly changing. But as of right now, for 2023 statistics, age 11 is the average age.
Wow.
And then, what was it? I have it right here. It is 47% of 11-year-olds are on TikTok.
Gosh, that's crazy.
And it's parents don't know what they don't know.
Right, because the parents aren't on TikTok.
Right, or even if they are, they just think, oh, well, my kid's a really good kid. I have all the settings on. They just watch, what they watch. They're a really private account. It doesn't matter. There's been dozens of studies now, like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. You sign up as a 13-year-old boy or girl, and within 24 hours, your feed is nothing but sexual content, drug content, self-harm content, you name it. TikTok's actually really bad at the self-harm content.
With self-harm content?
Yeah.
So encouraging kids to
cut
commit suicide or
and
cut themselves.
A lot of suicide talk, dark talk.
And they're sent those things, they're targeted.
It's just on the For You page of TikTok. And so that's what I always
Makes you wonder who these people are that are sending all of this garbage, right? I mean, what?
Well, that's another topic, right?
Yeah, that's a whole
the
other...
downfall of our society, but in our culture. But
right.
And so many parents don't truly understand the content that is available to their children that they can accidentally come across, or that the feed is even just giving them. And then even when they have private accounts on Instagram and Snapchat, they can still get messages from strangers.
Okay.
They have to go like to a special folder and open them on Instagram. On Snapchat, anybody can send them a message. And so on Snapchat, within 24 hours, a young girl will get messages from men of inappropriate photos. And boys within 24 hours will get messages about drug dealing.
Wow.
And parents just, I don't care how good your kid is. I don't care what restrictions you have. You can't stop that.
Yeah, right. Yes. And so let's tackle some of those specific types of dangers, because there are a whole lot of different types of dangers of kids being on social media, on the phones, but specifically on social media. We talked a little bit about some of those physical dangers that kids can be put into. And I think even that also includes some of the dangers of, being asked to send nude photos or that kind of where they do the sextortion. We've seen a lot of cases of that where young boys or young girls end up committing suicide because they are tricked into sending nude photos, which then they're threatened to either they go around or they're threatened to be sent around. A lot of other specific physical. What are some of the other? You touched on a couple of them, but what are some other physical dangers?
Well, I mean, the screen time addiction is very real. 25% of kids under 18 in this country are clinically addicted to screen time. And what that does to them is they start withdrawing within themselves. They can't, they feel anxious anytime they're away from their phone. They will stay awake until 1 or 2 in the morning as a middle schooler or a high schooler on their phone. I mean, the statistics show that 4.8 hours is the average number of hours teenagers in this country spend on social media only.
Per day.
Yeah. So think about 5 hours. What are they not doing in those 5 hours?
Right.
They're not interacting with friends. They're not interacting with family.
They think they're interacting with friends because that replaces it a lot of times. Yeah. We'll get into that later in the social, emotional stuff.
But if they're not getting enough sleep, so they're not sleeping, right? That's the biggest one with that much screen time. They're not sleeping. And so one of my helpful tips to parents.
It keeps you awake too. I know that even with adults, they recommend that you turn those devices off for a certain.
The way it interacts with the brain. And so they're then going to school exhausted, and they're not doing well in school. They're not learning. They're not eating as well. They're not performing as well in their sports. Right. I mean, and then it just goes on from there. We all know they're not growing properly if they're young enough. And their brains are being rewired with that much screen time.
Yeah.
And it's considered, there's a book called Glow Kids, which is a little bit older, but they did all this research and have found that being addicted to screen time is as bad as being on heroin.
Wow.
They call it digital heroin, video games and social media and the screens.
Okay, so what kinds of things you're saying it rewires your brain, and what do you know how that, what that mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, so basically adolescents, especially those 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, their brain is growing rapidly.
Right.
And so when they start getting all those dopamine hits from social media and from, getting likes on their post or just even seeing funny videos, it's actually causing their brain to just seek that more and more. And it's making that like a permanent need to be at that level of dopamine, which is why we're then seeing later on the anxiety and the depression.
Okay.
And that huge study just came out that was over several years, and they said any teens or adolescents, even preteens, that spend 3 hours or more a day are at double the risk of anxiety or depression.
Wow.
So if they spend 3 hours a day or more on social media.
And I know we're seeing heightened numbers of anxiety, and I'm certain that parents are not connecting those two things, right? That the screen time and the time on social media. I mean, some of them may be, or they may think that, but hearing that's really staggering.
Well, and it's funny you bring up the parents, because involved parents who are having open communication with their kids about social media and who are, talking to them about the dangers of it and whatever, actually can have a significant impact on reducing the detrimental effects.
Okay.
So there's 60% of the teens who have the highest users of social media, they say they have very low parental monitoring and very weak parental relationships. And then they also have very poor mental health. That's the teens themselves saying that. But the opposite end of that is the ones who use it almost as much, but have really strong parental connections and relationships. The numbers go down much lower.
Yeah.
And so as a parent, even if you're choosing to let your teenagers, especially once they get a little older, have this, you being involved, you talking to them, you asking them about what they're watching, what they're doing, what their friends are sharing, it's going to help them actually be less likely to be anxious, less likely to be depressed, less likely to have eating disorders, less likely to send those nudes, less likely to get those, fentanyl-laced pills that you can get from a drug dealer on Snapchat delivered to your door.
Right. Right. I mean, yeah. and it, because really it's funny you said that I was thinking about this earlier when after we'd kind of chatted initially about prepping for this, but it's almost like you hand these things, and we don't think about it in this context, right? But like, you wouldn't take an 8-year-old and drop them in the middle of Las Vegas and give them $1,000 and say, go have fun, right? So it's like, or in the middle of some, drug infested neighborhood in inner city somewhere, but really that's what is on there, right? Yeah. So you have all of those, the exposure to all of that stuff, to nude content, to porn, to drugs, and even I've seen news stories about young college kids that end up trafficking people across. They get paid to shuttle people across the border, and they get killed or they get arrested, and they're getting lured on social media.
The cartel was actually placing Instagram ads targeting college age kids to do that.
And so if you're a college kid and they don't typically have a lot of sense.
Right.
They're not known for that anyway. I mean, because the frontal cortex is not, it hasn't fully developed. And if you're used to being on social media, this is the same reason, this is a separate topic, but it's the same reason why they target girls with like egg harvesting and things like that, because they see, money, this isn't going to really do anything. It's not going to, it's easy money. It's not going to really affect me. Yeah. And then they get themselves into really big trouble on accident.
Yes.
Because the people who are luring them know exactly what they're doing, and they know how to make it sound like it's a piece of cake and they're not going to get caught and it's going to be easy money, right?
And the algorithms are scary smart. They figure out what age range you are, where you're located, and like what your interests or vulnerabilities are very quickly. Yeah. And just by things like your patterns of usage, what you like, what you search, any of that. And so it is really, really scary. And it's, these platforms were built for adults,
right?
Not for children. And, I know I mentioned it in our prep meeting, but the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, came out last week saying we need to have a warning label on all social media platforms. Wow. Because even a year ago, he had come out about like the loneliness epidemic and all the stuff that social media is causing with anxiety too. And now he's come out with an even stronger, like, no, there needs to be some like legal changes.
And this is a side topic, and we might need to touch on this at the end too. But I know I've had frustrations because we've seen even locally in the Arizona legislature where you get pushback trying to put laws into place that don't allow content to go to kids, that put extra protections, and the certain political people and parties do not want that on there. Yeah. And so they fight it where you are not having that extra layer of protection to porn sites or whatever it is. Yeah. Specifically, it's usually porn that we're talking about.
And that's the ID verification, like where you have to actually enter in like ID information so they can verify your date of birth.
Right.
Yes.
And they don't want that. Yeah. So they're trying, there are political people who are in office that want that to still be open and come up with all these really, in my opinion, lame excuses for why they won't allow those kinds of things, vetoing laws or stopping them, blocking things from coming through that are designed to put that extra layer of protection. Yeah.
And if a society can't protect its children or refuses to protect its children, what does that say about us as a society, right?
Yes.
And as Christians, obviously, like our children are gifts from the Lord. And so like as parents, that's my plea to any parents listening is like, please, like, take this seriously, because you might think your kid's amazing. You might think, oh, I'm going to check their usage. I have all the settings on. But as soon as you give them access to that, it's now the world has access to them.
Right.
And all the values that the world has. Do you want the world to teach them, or do
Right.
you and the church want to teach them?
Yeah,
right?
I think again, a lot of people, especially if you didn't grow up in the social media age, right? So I didn't grow up with social media. Didn't even exist until
Right.
I was an older adult, right?
Yeah.
It's changed so much in such a short period of time to where I do think it's hard sometimes for parents to fully understand just how bad it is.
Yeah.
And so let's look at. Did you have something else?
I was going to say, on that note, to give them a feeling how bad it is, 43% of kids who are exposed to inappropriate sexual content online are under 13.
Good grief.
That's basically half of the kids who see something inappropriate
Wow.
are under 13. So do you want your 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old
Right.
seeing inappropriate sexual content?
And it's graphic, right? I mean,
Yes.
that also has changed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even this is another separate conversation, but even just the porn content from the 80s to now is so much
more
worse.
violent and graphic.
It's
Yes.
horrendously worse.
And then one quick thing on that before we move on is on Snapchat. So if you have your 11, 12, 13, 14, whatever year old on Snapchat, when they open up the app, it's the camera, that's what Snapchat's always been, camera first. But then they hit the page to go to where they watch their friends' stories. Right below that is another thing they can click on and get to Pornhub. So literally 2 clicks,
Wow.
and they can be in Pornhub. So
Yeah.
if your kid has Snapchat, you better know that.
Yeah,
That's what
really.
you're giving them access to.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so this leads into, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but emotional and relational dangers on there. And I think we talked about it a little bit, but there's more in depth. Even when I'm looking at this, I see so many teenagers or even young adults that have a hard time with face-to-face interaction. They don't know how to talk to a live person because all of their contact with people is on their phone, right?
Yes.
It's by text or by social media, or they're sitting next to each other on the couch and texting back and forth.
It's really interesting because I was out of town this last weekend with 2 of my best friends from college, and we had breakfast with my one friend's niece, who's 18, just graduated high school, and she's been raised very well to stay off phones as much as possible, to have conversation when you're hanging out with people. And she said, I get mad at my friends and call them out almost daily when we're hanging out.
Yeah.
That, please, can you get off your phone, or why did I come?
Right.
Like, I mean, that's an 18-year-old saying that because she was raised differently, and she wants to engage with people.
Yes.
And she's very good at it, but most of her friends, she has to call them out on it.
And so those relationships, if all of your relationships are virtual, it really does also damage your emotional health and your ability to, I mean, it's broad, the damage that it can cause in being able to have a job interview or deal with customers if you were working, or in school, interacting with teachers, with a whole slew of things that create challenges if you are not able to have a conversation with someone face to face. It really does limit the ability to succeed in life. I mean, not to put too, that sounds dramatic.
No, but it's true. I mean, if you have no social skills, you're not going to be able to advocate for yourself. You're not going to be able to meet new people. You're not going to be able to interview well.
Right.
All the things. And I mean, I've interviewed for a variety of reasons, a lot of younger people for job purposes and things like that. And, or meet with them to help them prepare. And they really are
struggling.
They're really struggling.
And
really.
I mean, it's not to be unexpected, right? I mean, that of course they would struggle. Like that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
That you don't have that. When we didn't have any of that stuff, not to say, okay, we need to go back to the dark ages, but you had lots of practice talking to people, and they really don't have the opportunity as much anymore because everything is virtual. And even, with COVID, when they shut everything down and school was virtual, and a lot of things switched to being virtual at that point, where you have meetings online and you're still talking face to face with a person when you're on an online meeting, but a lot of that content became more virtual rather than face-to-face, which then also, as an adult, when you're used to having face-to-face interaction, it's not as damaging, but when you're a kid, it really does, I would think, have an effect.
Yeah, and you're not learning. And then it also, of course, contributes to loneliness. They think they're connected, like you said earlier. They think they're interacting with their friends, but it's not the same as face-to-face, in-person time.
And I have seen, I know young people who even grew up in church that then get sucked into, like, especially the trans
Yeah.
ideology, because they online, right? It
Yes.
becomes one of those where they're isolated from real people, right?
Yep.
And being told, where it's like those algorithms that you were talking
Right.
about with they know exactly what to say to you,
Yeah.
where your weaknesses are, which is just, the enemy, right? The
Yeah.
enemy does that too.
Yeah.
It knows how to target you, but having that targeting and being pulled and isolated and told, don't trust your family, don't talk to your family, and it just breeds that kind of, I know people that's happened to.
Yeah, and it's just, it's really like anything on social media. If anybody gets sucked into like a little echo chamber, right, then they're reading the comments and everybody's affirming the same things, and
Right.
everybody's sharing positive stories and experiences, and so they just really start to believe that.
Yeah.
And so that goes back to, once again, unless you are watching everything your kid is watching on social media, you don't know what content they're being fed and what ideologies they're being hearing about and learning. There is somebody that went viral recently on TikTok that was a LGBTQ, I want to say it was a trans person, who was doing readings from the Quran and promoting Islam as an LGBTQ person. And people were going nuts, and this person just started getting like really, really popular. And it's so soothing to listen to them read the Quran, and oh my goodness. And I was like, this does not compute, right? But once again, that's the type of stuff that can just start to be fed to your kids. And so even if they're not searching for it, the algorithm is constantly trying to feed you things to find out what you might get your attention and might get you to stay on the platform longer.
Right.
And so, and then if it sees something's trending, it's going to feed it to you.
Right.
No matter who you are and what age you are.
Yeah, that is really scary. And it's funny because you're saying this is a separate topic, and I want to get back to what we were just talking about. But we've had instances where we're having a conversation about something that we need to purchase, and then you pull up your phone and all of a sudden it's giving you ads for it. It's like, that is scary.
Well, so I will tell you how that works, just as a fun aside, because I've worked in marketing and social media for so long. That is, companies can bid on keywords. And if you have Siri or whatever, the Android version of Siri is turned on, it is not listening to your whole conversation, but it's listening for keywords. And kind of like keywords on a Google search, the companies actually can bid to show you an ad that relates to that keyword.
And see, we don't have Alexa. I don't have any of that. It's interesting how that, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, 1984
right.
Brave New World.
Yeah.
Which, if you have not read those, go read them.
Yes.
Because we're living that right now, actually. But what I was going to say before about we were talking about transitioning, I've seen a lot of videos of detransitioners.
Yes, me too.
And a lot of them talk about getting lured in on social media.
Yeah.
And it's obviously not, they have to have that already kind of, they're struggling in some area and they're thinking about that, but then they start having a conversation, and what you're saying, they get affirmed, and they're wanting that affirmation. And so then they get lured into, just like the kids getting lured into driving people illegally across the border, or smuggling drugs and
politics or plastic surgery, or it's all kinds of things that they're getting lured into.
Or even with college students, it's a lot of the protests and things that are going on campus,
and
where
they don't even know what any of it means.
They don't know what they're doing, and they're getting lured into, just come show up and we'll give you bricks and pay you $50 or whatever it is. I don't know how much they're getting paid, but there is a lot of that where they're luring kids and teens and young adults into behavior like that they wouldn't necessarily do if they were having regular interactions with family and people in church.
You know who their friends are, you know who they're interacting with in real life, but online, it's literally the whole world is at their fingertips.
Yes, which is just so scary.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the spiritual ramifications of this. We kind of talked about this a little bit too, but of all of that. So do you have any thoughts on that? Yeah,
once again, it's, if you're spending that much time on social media, are you going to youth group? Are you going to your, Bible study? Or are you reading your Bible? Are you praying? That something is giving. If you're spending that many hours a day, you're losing time somewhere. And oftentimes, the more you get sucked into social media and being entertained, then you have no patience for reading your Bible or sitting in the quiet and praying, right?
Yeah.
And so that's definitely a major danger. Goes back to the lack of social skills. how are we going to evangelize? How are we going to meet new people and make those connections where we're going to get the opportunity to share our testimony, to share about Jesus, if we can't even talk to people in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, depending on what content you're seeing and what you get sucked into, then you might completely go in the opposite direction and want to leave the church,
the faith,
want
right?
want to not believe in Jesus, want to not believe what your family and your church have taught you. Or you can even start to idolize. Like some people get really into certain influencers or celebrities on social media, or just a certain, topic that they're really passionate about, and that becomes an idol in their life. And not that saying that can't happen without social media, but social media makes all of those
breeds all of it. Yes.
Much bigger likelihood of happening. Right?
Yeah. Okay, so then the question becomes, what do we do about all of this? Because it is a big issue, and it's something that's very difficult. If that many kids are having, it's kind of hard to put the genie back in the bottle, right? So it's like you can't. You have kids that have phones. You can't just go from that to being Amish, right? And go backwards. So it's difficult. That's a difficult thing to do. Right. So let's talk on two levels. One, if you have young kids that have not yet gotten into social media or into having a phone, all of that, what would your recommendation for that be?
Yeah, and I would add to that, young kids, like if they're 13 and under, and even if you have gone down this route, it's not too late to pull back. Right. If they're in high school, we have a different conversation that'll come up. But yeah, young kids in middle school, and you have maybe either haven't yet or you maybe have started to give them something. Step number one is having the conversation of why you don't want them to have access to social media or a smartphone, and talk to them honestly. Like my kids know, they're 10 and 12, and I've been talking to them for 4 years already, maybe longer, about what to do if you see an inappropriate image and naked body. Talking to them about the dangers of social media. Talking about we didn't even mention the FOMO, but the cyberbullying. That 1 in 3 kids are cyberbullied. I mean
that's crazy,
right there, right? Don't you want to protect your kids from that? But so having an open and honest conversation with them about why you're concerned. Because the number one pushback I see from parents on saying don't let them have social media is, well, they're just going to go behind your back. Well, no, I actually know quite a few friends who have older kids who are maybe even 18 or 19 or older now, who never went behind their back. They would tell them by now,
right?
Because they had this. So having that open and honest conversation, not just you don't get to have it because I said so. You do have to have the hard conversation. The other thing I could say is, you're knowing who their friends are, knowing what their device rules are, knowing what their access is. If your kids are younger, seek out those parents of your friends, have the same conversation, and ask if you can bond together and all hold off.
That's
Because
a really
the
good
thing
idea.
is, my daughter is almost 13, going in 7th grade, and every single one of her closest friends does not have a smartphone, will not have one for a long time, and will not get social media for a long time.
Yeah.
And so she doesn't care. She's like, she has her iPad that she's allowed to text them with an iMessage, but other than that, she doesn't she has her iPad super locked down. But so that makes it a lot easier if you can find even 1 or 2 friends, families who are willing to band with you. That's the huge thing.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
it sounds really overwhelming, but that's if they're young enough, that's as simple as it is. Is talk to them about why you're not going to do it. And then there's really great options. Gab wireless is my favorite for young kids because they have a dumb watch that gives you a lot of parental controls and no internet access. And then they have a dumb phone that looks like a smartphone. So if you have a kid who's very conscious of fitting in, it looks like they have a smartphone, but it's not. For a little bit older, Bark Technologies has their own phone that's also fabulous. So for the parents that want to have contact with their kids, there's tons of other options. There are options where they're not going to have internet or social media access, but they can text or call you and approved friends and family.
And are those ones where you can turn on internet access?
No.
Or they don't have it at all?
Well, Bark does, yes.
Okay. Because I know I have students that I teach classes, and I know there are students where we're doing something in class where they need to get online and do an activity.
Right.
And so I have had students where they have to then contact their mom to turn the internet on their phone, and then it's turned on for a brief period of time while we're in class so that they can do, a quiz or something online. So I do know that those options also are there. What about for teenagers? And this has already they've had access to social media. What's your recommendation for them?
So number one, once again, sit down and have that conversation about you're concerned. If you're not already tracking their screen time, track their screen time. All of the smartphones have options where you can get that access. And so you can truly see, because some kids don't have a problem with it. Some kids aren't addicted, right?
Right.
So truly seeing that, but having the conversations of all these dangers we've talked about today. And then if you don't already have the Bark app on their phone, get the Bark app. It's not perfect, but it's going to monitor for self-harm keywords, for drug keywords, for sexual keywords, and you will get alerts. And so if they're searching things, if they're texting things, it doesn't work on Snapchat, of course. But
Right.
that's the one thing I would say. If your kid is 16 or under and they have Snapchat, I'm sorry, it needs to go. You have to be the mean mom and you have to get rid of it. 17, 18, maybe. My kids aren't getting Snapchat. As how it stands now, my kids aren't getting Snapchat until they go to college. It's that bad now. It didn't used to be that bad, but it's gotten really bad.
It's gotten bad.
But yeah, so it's having those open conversations, explaining them your concerns, and setting some restrictions. Number one rule: no devices in the bedroom at night. If you're letting them have the device in the room at night, they're losing sleep and they're doing who knows what. Right? That's late at night by themselves in the room is a problem. So, and that's, doing that. And then also if they're going to friends' houses, even as a teenager, and knowing what that family's rules are and having conversations with them about it.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think that's great information. And we'll have some links that we'll put in the show notes to let parents have information to do some further research, a lot of great resources. So we'll add those in there. And then also to just be in prayer. I mean, a lot of it, you can pray for protection for your kids, for any type of danger. We pray over physical protections. You can pray over these types of protection to protect them from those kinds of things as well. And having those conversations, because something you said earlier about, they can just go around you and do it. Well, yes, that's true of anything, right? That's true of alcohol, of sex, of smoking, of drugs, of all of that.
Doesn't mean you're not going to put the rules in place.
It doesn't, right. It doesn't mean that you just say, okay, go ahead and do those things. Right. So anything that is a danger, and again, some of those things may not be dangers when you're older, right? Social media, those things when you're an adult. But when you're a kid, the rules are different, and they should be different. And it's really good. And again, not to feel like you've failed if you have made mistakes with this, because
nobody knows.
And again, we did not have that when we were young.
Yeah.
And so it really is a whole different world and it's a lot to try to figure out as a parent. But I love that advice of finding some friends that you can bond together and be with and support each other.
Yeah.
Because that's important just in general, but in this kind of community, it's really important.
And I do love that you said that if don't feel bad, you're not a failure if you've let your kids have it at 11, 12.
Right.
Once again, majority of parents right now, it's still so new, and this information is just starting to come out. Most parents just don't know.
You don't know what you don't know.
You're doing the best you can with the information you have. So I never want to shame parents for the choices they've made. I'm just trying to help them learn now so that they can make it better going forward.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah. So thank you for joining us on Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify and follow us on social media. Find all the info on the show notes. To learn more about Dream City Church, visit our website at dreamcitychurch.us. Thanks for listening.